Chapter 1. The Architect of Sacrifice. I was 47 when I convinced myself I'd finally figured out life. Career? Solid. I'd built my own architecture firm from scratch, and by then, I was designing commercial complexes that carried my name on their cornerstones. Money wasn't a concern anymore. I drove a midnight black Audi, lived in a house with windows wide enough to swallow the morning sun, and had investments stacked neatly like bricks in a skyscraper. What I didn't have was a family. Not really. And maybe that's why Carla's smile hit me the way it did. We met at a gallery opening downtown. She wore this wine-colored dress that clung to her curves in a way that made every man in the room look twice. But it wasn't just her beauty, it was the confidence. Carla laughed with her whole body, as if she owned the space, and people naturally orbited her. She had that rare ability to make anyone feel like the most important person in the room until the next person came along. An architect? She asked that night when I introduced myself. That explains the suit. You men in suits always look like you're plotting to redesign the world. And you? I asked, sipping my drink. What do you do when you're not breaking hearts at art shows? She smirked. Single mom. That's a full-time job. That was the first time she mentioned Jade, her teenage daughter. 17 then, turning 18 in a few months. I'll admit, I hesitated. At my age, I wasn't exactly looking to start parenting from scratch. But Carla had this way of making obstacles sound like opportunities. You'd like her, she said casually. She's artistic. Stubborn too. Just like me. I smiled, half cocky, half guarded. Then I suppose I don't stand a chance with either of you. Carla laughed, tossing her hair over her shoulder. That laugh, it was a hook, and I was the fool who bit down hard. We started seeing each other often. Dinners, late-night drives, weekend trips out of town. She was magnetic, and for the first time in years, I felt alive outside of blueprints and boardrooms. Still, early on, Carla made one thing crystal clear. I don't want more kids, she said one night over wine at my place. Jade is my world. I don't want to start over. If you're looking for someone to give you children, I'm not the one. She said it so firmly, almost daring me to disagree. I could have walked away right then. I had no children of my own. I'd picture it once, maybe in some distant version of life. But with Carla looking at me across that candlelit table, her hand brushing mine as if sealing a pact, I told myself love was enough. I'm not here to change you, I replied. If Jade is your world, then she's mine too. Her smile told me I'd said the right thing. And I believed it. I really did. The months that followed were a blur of giving. Carla moved into my house soon after. Suddenly, the home I'd built to be sleek and minimal was filled with traces of them. Jade's paintbrushes drying by the sink, Carla's perfume drifting through the halls, laughter echoing where silence once ruled. I told myself it was life breathing into a structure I'd built too rigid. When Jade turned 18, I paid her private school tuition without blinking. She wanted to pursue arts seriously, and Carla insisted a private program would unlock her potential. I wrote the checks. When Carla's SUV broke down, I replaced it with a brand new one, pearl white, leather seats, top of the line. I told her she deserved it. Vacations? I booked them. Italy, the Bahamas, a ski trip in Aspen even though I hated the cold. Every trip was another attempt to stitch myself into the fabric of their lives. And yet, despite all that, I could feel it, the quiet wall. Jade tolerated me. She said thank you when prompted, smiled politely when I hovered near her artwork, but there was always distance in her eyes. She didn't look at me like a father figure, more like a sponsor. Her mother's family wasn't much better. At family gatherings, I catch her sisters whispering, smirking. Carla really found herself a provider. One of them muttered once, not knowing I could hear. Yeah, her golden ticket, another laughed. I didn't flinch. I just sipped my drink, leaned back in my chair, and smiled like the comments bounced right off me. My silence unnerved them. Let them think I was too proud to care. Truth was the word stuck. They lodged somewhere deep inside, but I buried them under my calm exterior. One Sunday afternoon, during a family barbecue, Carla's brother decided to test me openly. So, architect, he said, leaning over the grill with a beer in hand. You really planning on footing Jade's college bill too? That's what? Another few $100,000? For a kid who isn't even yours. The table went quiet. Carla didn't defend me. Jade didn't either. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Money isn't the issue, I replied. What matters is giving her the best chance at success. And besides, I raised my glass. I'd rather spend it on family than waste it on myself. He scoffed, but I caught the flicker in his eyes. My composure bothered him more than if I'd snapped. That became my weapon, calm, cocky indifference. They laughed, mocked, and dismissed me, but it never gave them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Still, late at night, lying awake beside Carla's sleeping figure, I felt the cracks forming. I'd built skyscrapers, whole districts even, but I couldn't build a bridge into this family. No matter how much I gave, no matter how many checks I wrote or trips I booked, the feeling lingered. I was a guest in my own home, a man living among people who tolerated him, not loved him. But I told myself it was temporary. That patience, loyalty, and sacrifice would eventually pay off. Because what was love, if not sacrifice? I closed my eyes, repeating the same lie I'd been telling myself since the night Carla first laughed across that gallery floor. That love alone was enough. Chapter 2. Playing Dad without the title. Morning routines became my battleground. By 6:30, I was already dressed in my pressed shirt and polished shoes, pouring coffee into a travel mug while the rest of the house slowly woke up. Jade would shuffle into the kitchen, hair messy, eyes half closed, wearing a hoodie 2 sizes too big. Morning, I'd say, cheerful, as though enthusiasm could bridge the gap between us. She'd grunt, sliding past me to grab the cereal box. That was our rhythm, me trying, her avoiding. I'd offer to drop her at school. Sometimes she'd accept, most times she'd insist Carla was taking her. When she did let me drive, the car ride was filled with the silence of 2 strangers trapped together. Got a test today? I'd ask once, trying to spark conversation. Yeah. Math. English. Need any last-minute help? I was always decent with literature. She turned her head, eyes on the passing road. I'm fine. And that was that. I nod, keep my face calm, and drive on as though I wasn't bleeding inside. Evenings weren't much different. She'd sit at the dining table with her laptop open, books sprawled around her. I'd pull up a chair, careful not to crowd. Need a second set of eyes? I'd ask, pointing at her essay draft. She sighed, reluctant, but slid the laptop over. I'd read her work carefully, pointing out places where sentences could flow better or ideas could be stronger. This line here, I'd say gently, it's powerful. But if you move it up, it could be your thesis. She blinked at me, almost surprised I'd said something useful. For a second, the wall between us cracked. Okay, she murmured, taking the laptop back. That fleeting acknowledgement kept me going. One crumb of appreciation was enough to convince me the whole loaf might follow someday. Her art was the one part of her world I desperately wanted to enter. Jade painted with this raw, moody energy, colors splashed across canvas like she was bleeding emotions only she could understand. I'd step into the garage, where she converted one corner into her studio, and watch quietly. You're talented, I'd tell her. That red, you used it perfectly. It draws the eye without overpowering. She'd pause, brush in hand, then glance at me with suspicion, like I was trespassing. Can you? Not hover, she muttered once. I raised my hands in surrender. Got it. No hovering, just appreciating. I backed away, smiling, though inside I felt like a burglar caught in someone else's house. The financial part was easier. Money was something I could provide without rejection. I paid for her art supplies, hundreds of dollars in paints, brushes, and canvases. I upgraded her laptop when the old one crashed. When her class organized a trip to New York to visit museums, I covered the expenses before Carla even asked. Are you sure? Carla asked once, resting a hand on my arm. It's not cheap. I can handle it, I replied smoothly. Besides, opportunities like this matter. She kissed my cheek, grateful, and I basked in that moment, convincing myself I was investing in love, not just expenses. But every investment seemed to bounce off an invisible wall. Jade rarely said thank you without prompting. Sometimes she wouldn't even acknowledge me when I handed her something. One evening, I drove her to an art supply store across town. She wanted a particular brand of acrylics. On the way back, I tried small talk. When I was your age, I used to sketch buildings. Nothing like your work, but I always thought about how lines and shapes could mean more than just structures. She didn't look up from her phone. Cool. That's it? Just cool. I chuckled. Yeah, cool. Silence followed. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing a calm expression. I wouldn't let her see me frustrated. The hardest moments weren't Jade's coldness. It was Carla's family reinforcing it. At gatherings, her sisters would throw subtle barbs. You're trying too hard, one said over dessert. Jade already has a dad. Don't stress yourself. Her uncle laughed once, after I praised one of Jade's paintings. Careful, he said. You sound more like a fan than a stepdad. Carla would laugh lightly, brushing it off as family humor. Jade never corrected them. She never said, he's part of my life too. Instead, she sat quietly, letting me wear the fool's crown. I remember one sharp moment like a knife. Carla's mother, sharp-tongued and never subtle, watched me refill Jade's plate at dinner. She doesn't need two fathers, she muttered. One is enough. The table chuckled softly. I kept my composure, my trademark smirk plaster on my face. Don't worry, I replied smoothly. I know I can't compete with biology. I'm just here to make sure no one starves. The family laughed harder. Some thought I was witty. Others thought I was pathetic. I swallowed both possibilities with a sip of wine. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd sit at my desk with a glass of whiskey, staring at my own blueprints. Clean lines, perfect measurements, foundations that could weather storms. Buildings made sense. Families didn't. I replayed the moments over and over, the cold silences in the car, the reluctant nods over homework, the mocking laughter at dinner tables. And still I told myself, patience. Love takes time. She'll see eventually. She'll understand what I've done for her. It was easier to believe that lie than to admit the truth. I was pouring bricks into a foundation that wasn't mine. One night, I overheard Jade on the phone with a friend. Yeah, he's nice, I guess, she said, but he's not my dad. He's just around, like a sponsor. A sponsor. I leaned against the hallway wall, the word echoing in my skull. I wanted to storm in, demand acknowledgement, but I didn't. I slipped quietly back into my study, poured another drink, and sat in silence. My reflection in the glass smirked back at me, as if mocking my own stupidity. Still, I held on to the smallest of victories. The one time she accepted my editing advice on her essay. The few car rides where she hummed along to the radio instead of glaring at her phone. Those crumbs convinced me to stay the course. Patience will pay off, I whispered to myself. It has to. But deep down, another voice whispered darker truths. I wasn't a father here. I wasn't even a stepfather. I was a visitor tolerated for my usefulness, not welcomed for my presence. I was building a house on someone else's land. And one day, I feared they'd remind me it was never mine to begin with. Chapter 3. Cracks in the Foundation. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That people in long relationships went through phases, ups and downs, little stretches where one partner seemed distracted. But over time, the distractions became Carla's default. She wasn't cruel, just absent. One Friday evening, I suggested a family movie night. I bought popcorn, rented a new release, even set up the living room with extra pillows and blankets to make it cozy. Carla walked in, glanced at the setup, and chuckled lightly. You really went all out, huh? Thought it'd be nice, I said, grinning. The three of us, just relaxing. She shook her head. I've got work to catch up on. What about Jade? I asked. She's out with friends. You should have checked with us first. The words stung. I had checked. Earlier in the week, I'd mentioned it at dinner. Neither of them said no. But instead of pointing that out, I just smiled thinly and let the popcorn grow stale. The indifference spread like cracks in concrete. On Saturday mornings, I'd suggest we drive somewhere, maybe the coast, maybe a little mountain getaway. Carla always had an excuse. Too busy. Too tired. Not in the mood. One morning, I tried again. What about next weekend? Just us. We could drive up north, rent a cabin. Carla cut me off, scrolling through her phone. God, you always want to plan something. Can't we just? Nah. I swallowed the response that clawed its way up my throat. Instead, I gave a small, practiced smirk and said, sure. Just thought I'd try to make memories. She didn't even look up. The more I noticed, the harder it became to ignore. At a dinner with Carla's extended family, her cousin made a joke at my expense. Careful, if you let him keep planning trips, he'll have you two backpacking across Europe while he carries all the bags, the cousin quipped. The table erupted in laughter. Carla laughed the loudest. I glanced at her, searching for even a flicker of defense, but she wiped tears from her eyes as though the joke was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. You'd probably like that, wouldn't you? She teased, nudging me. Playing the porter? The table roared again. I forced a grin, raised my glass, and said nothing. Inside, something cracked. Later that night, I tried to talk to her about it. Do you realize how it feels when you laugh like that? I asked quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Carla, brushing her hair in a mirror, didn't even pause. It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. It didn't feel like a joke, I pressed. She turned, eyebrow arched. So now I can't laugh? Do you want me to walk around on eggshells just to protect your feelings? I exhaled slowly. I want you to treat me like your husband, not a punchline. She rolled her eyes. You're overthinking everything. And with that, she switched off the light, climbed into bed, and turned away from me. Conversation over. The pattern repeated. Carla grew colder in small, cutting ways. At family dinners, she laughed at every slight. When Jade made a sarcastic jab, Carla smirked instead of correcting her. When relatives nudged at me about being the victim, Carla sipped her wine, silent but smiling. Once, at a friend's gathering, someone teased me about how much I worked. He's probably at the office more than he's home. Poor Carla must be lonely. Carla laughed and said, well, at least it keeps him out of my hair. Everyone chuckled. I chuckled too, like it didn't slice into me. But later, when we were alone, I asked why she said it. Because it's true, she replied simply, scrolling through her phone. The loneliness was heavier than silence. It was the kind of isolation that existed even in company when the person beside you felt a million miles away. I tried harder, foolishly thinking effort could glue us back together. Let's have dinner at that place you like downtown, I suggested one Friday. Not hungry, she said. What about a spa day? Just you and me? Stop pushing, she snapped. Why can't you just relax? So I learned to stop asking. But my silence wasn't weakness. Silence became my armor. Where family mocked, I smiled and sipped my drink. When Jade rolled her eyes, I nodded and moved on. When Carla dismissed my efforts, I swallowed the sting and tucked it away like ammunition. Because sometimes silence is sharper than anger. Silence unsettles. Silence lingers. I had mastered it. Every crack in the foundation made me more certain. Something was shifting and not in my favor. I didn't know when or how, but I could feel it, the weight of an inevitable collapse pressing down on the beams of our life together. Quiet suspense buzzed beneath every dinner, every car ride, every bedtime silence. It was coming. Something explosive, and all I could do was wait. Chapter 4. The birthday he bankrolled. The house smelled like roses and vanilla frosting that morning. I'd spent weeks arranging everything for Jade's 19th birthday. The caterers, the decorations, the rented marquee out in the backyard. White tents with golden drapes, strings of fairy lights twinkling even in daylight, and a DJ booth set in the corner ready to fill the night with music. It wasn't just a party, it was a spectacle. Because if love couldn't win her over, maybe generosity could. Carla breezed through the living room in a silk robe, surveying the place like she owned every inch of it. Wow, she said, sipping her coffee. You really went all out. I smiled. She only turns 19 once. Carla kissed my cheek absently. Good thing you're good with money. The words weren't gratitude. They were acknowledgement. Like I was the event planner she'd hired, not the man who slept in her bed. By evening, the house was alive. Music thumped, chatter bubbled, laughter filled the air. Jade's friends arrived in clusters, dressed in glitter and heels. Carla's sisters and cousins swarmed the buffet, complimenting the spread I'd paid for as though the food had appeared by magic. I stood near the entrance, greeting guests like a host should, smiling, shaking hands, pouring drinks. Nobody really looked at me, though. They looked past me toward Carla, toward Jade, as if I were part of the furniture, useful but invisible. When Jade finally came down the stairs, the party stilled for a moment. She wore a pale blue dress, her hair curled delicately, makeup sharp enough to belong on a magazine cover. She was radiant, young, confident, untouchable. Everyone clapped and cheered. Phones flashed. She basked in the attention, chin lifted, smile wide. Carla nudged me. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" "She is," I said softly. And I meant it. The gifts came later. A table had been set up near the marquee, stacked with shiny bags and wrapped boxes. Guests gathered as Jade began unwrapping them, squeals and cheers rising at each reveal. Jewelry, clothes, gift cards, it was a mountain of adoration. When it was my turn, I stepped forward with the gift I'd spent months curating. A large, flat box, wrapped in silver paper. Jade peeled it open and froze. Inside was a framed collection of her artwork, sketches, paintings, digital prints, meticulously gathered, printed on high-quality canvas, and arranged in a collage that told her story as an artist. I tracked down pieces from school exhibitions, borrowed a few from her portfolio when she wasn't looking, even bought back one she'd sold online. "This," I began, clear in my throat, "is your journey. Every brushstroke, every sketch, it's all you. I thought you should see it the way I do, as a masterpiece." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then polite claps trickled in. A few murmurs of "that's sweet." Jade stared at it blankly. "Thanks," she said flatly, setting it aside. The dismissal cut deeper than any insult. Moments later, Carla's sister appeared, waving a designer bag with a logo big enough to shout from across the room. "This one's from your dad," she announced gleefully. The room leaned in. Jade's eyes lit up as she pulled out a luxury purse, glossy and branded, the kind of gift meant to scream status. "Oh my God," Jade squealed, hugging the bag to her chest. "This is perfect." The crowd erupted. Cheers, whistles, applause. I stood frozen, my framed labor of love sitting forgotten in the corner, overshadowed by a leather purse bought by a man who hadn't shown up. "Leave it to her real dad," someone muttered. "Always knows how to impress." Then it happened. The moment that cracked everything wide open. Jade, still clutching the purse, turned toward me. Her eyes sparkled with cruelty wrapped in teenage arrogance. "You're not my real dad," she said loudly, so everyone could hear. "You'll never replace him." The air sucked out of the room. Heads turned. Guests stifled grins behind their glasses. Carla's sisters exchanged knowing looks. And then laughter. It started small, then spread like fire. Snickers, chuckles, outright cackles. A chorus of amusement at my expense. Carla? She laughed too. Loud, unrestrained, tilting her head back like it was the best joke she'd ever heard. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something, anything to soften the blow. But she only leaned closer to Jade and added, "If you have a problem with this, go and give birth, old man." The words sliced me clean in two. For a split second, silence inside me screamed louder than the party around us. I felt my jaw clench, my chest tighten, my fingers curl. They expected me to explode, to defend myself, to cause a scene that would validate every cruel whisper they'd ever said about me. But I didn't. I did what I'd always done. I smiled, a calm, deliberate smile, as though none of it touched me, as though I was a man 10 steps ahead. The laughter rolled on. Carla clinked glasses with her sister. Jade paraded her new purse like a crown jewel. And I stood there, still and unshaken. But inside, one thought rang clear, final, undeniable. Game over. Chapter 5. The calm before the storm. That night, the house was silent, but silence never felt so loud. I lay in bed beside Carla, staring at the ceiling while her soft, even breaths filled the room. She slept soundly, as if nothing had happened, as if her laughter earlier hadn't been the knife that finally severed me from whatever illusions I'd been clinging to. The faint glow of the streetlight cut across the ceiling, and my mind replayed the party in fragments. Jade clutching that purse like a trophy. Carla's sisters giggling. Carla herself, leaning in with that cruel smirk. "If you have a problem with this, go and give birth, old man." I turned my head to look at her. She was curled on her side, back to me, one arm tucked under her pillow. I studied her the way an architect studies a crumbling building, seeing every crack, every failing support beam, every place where repair wasn't worth it anymore. And in that quiet, I admitted something I'd been refusing to say aloud for years. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't Jade's stepfather. I was a sponsor, a walking wallet in a tailored suit, a guest in my own home. My chest tightened, not from anger this time, but from the weight of years of humiliations I had ignored. They rose in my memory, one after another, like ugly portraits on the walls of a gallery I never meant to visit. The time I leaned in to kiss Carla while she was cooking, and she pushed me away with a laugh. Not now, I'm busy. You're like a teenager sometimes. The sting had been sharp, but I swallowed it, pretending she was just stressed. Or the night Jade came home with a school project, and I offered to help. I've got it, she said, rolling her eyes. You wouldn't understand anyway. Her tone wasn't just dismissive, it was mocking. Like the very idea of me contributing was absurd. And then there were the family gatherings. The sly remarks from her relatives that slipped like daggers under the skin. Careful, you'll spoil them, her aunt teased when I paid for vacation. ATM machines don't last forever. Or the time her brother smirked and asked, how much does it cost to keep a family that isn't yours? Everyone had laughed. Carla too. And me? I raised my glass and smiled like I hadn't just been gutted in front of an audience. I closed my eyes, replaying each moment. I realized how I'd treated my silence as a badge of honor. I told myself it was strength, holding my composure while they chipped away at me piece by piece. But silence I now saw wasn't strength. It was surrender. Every smirk I ignored, every insult I let slide, every dismissal I swallowed, it had all been me conceding ground until there was nothing left of me in this house. And tonight, when Carla and Jade laughed at me in unison, they hadn't been mocking just a man. They had been mocking a fool. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake her. My feet touched the cold floor, and I pressed my hands together, elbows on my knees. For the first time in years, my head felt clear. Not emotional, not frantic, just clear. The architect in me took over. I wasn't a husband in this house. I was a builder who had poured resources into a project that was never mine to begin with. And every builder knows, when the foundation is rotten, no structure can stand. I rose quietly and walked into my study. The room smelled faintly of old whiskey and leather, lit only by the lamp on my desk. I sat down, pulled out a blank notepad, and just stared at it. I didn't need to write anything. The plan was already forming in my mind. Step by step, precise, methodical, not revenge. No, something sharper, something cleaner, a reclamation. I thought of the condo I'd kept downtown, a property no one in Carla's family even knew existed. My sanctuary, my escape hatch. I thought of the accounts I'd linked to Carla's name. The cards, the tuition funds, the expenses I should have pulled back years ago. I thought of the faces of every person who had laughed at me. Every glass raised in mockery. Every smirk I endured in silence. And I smiled. A different smile this time. Not the hollow one I wore for them, but a quiet, genuine smile of a man who had finally stopped lying to himself. I leaned back in the chair, hands folded across my chest. The storm was inevitable now. But storms don't announce themselves with thunder right away. They start with pressure, slow, building, unstoppable. And I felt that pressure rising in me. For years, I had built on sand. Now I was done building for them. No more guest. No more sponsor. I was reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I stood, switched off the lamp, and let the study sink into darkness. Back in bed, I lay down quietly beside Carla, her steady breathing unchanged. I stared at the ceiling again, but this time there was no doubt, no confusion, no bargaining with myself. Only certainty. I'm done. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered the final thought that sealed it. Tomorrow, I move my first piece. Chapter 6. Cutting the strings. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds like it always did, soft and golden. But today, it didn't feel warm. Today, it felt like a spotlight, illuminating the beginning of something inevitable. Carla was still asleep when I slipped out of bed. Her hair fanned across the pillow, Her face relaxed in a kind of innocence she hadn't earned in years. I stared at her for a long moment, not with love, not even with anger, but with the cold detachment of a man observing a stranger. I had played the husband. I had played the stepfather. I had played the fool. Now it was time to play myself. I dressed in silence, choosing one of my tailored charcoal suits. Not because the day required it, no, I could have done what I needed in jeans and a t-shirt, but because it was symbolic. I wanted to look in the mirror and see the man I had forgotten. Disciplined, sharp, untouchable. I checked my watch. 7:02 a.m. perfect. Lawyers like early calls. It shows intent. By 7:15, I was in my study, phone pressed to my ear. My attorney, Harris, picked up on the second ring. "Morning, Mr. Morgan," he said, voice groggy but professional. "What's the urgency?" I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the ceiling with a faint smirk. "Harris, I want you to begin freezing all joint accounts tied to Carla's name. Every single one. Credit cards, tuition trusts, emergency funds. If my name's on it, it's closed by end of day." There was a pause. "That's comprehensive. Are you certain?" "Dead certain," I said, my tone calm but laced with steel. "This isn't a request. This is me cutting strings. Today." Harris cleared his throat. "Understood. And the condo? Do you want me to know?" I cut in. "That stays quiet. It's mine. Always has been. Don't mention it in any documentation." "Of course." I ended the call, tossed the phone on the desk, and exhaled. The first piece had moved. By 9 o'clock, I was out the door. Carla was in the kitchen then, robe loosely tied, sipping coffee like a queen in her castle. "Heading to the office already?" she asked without looking up. "Something like that," I replied, adjusting my cufflinks. She barely nodded, scrolling her phone. She didn't even notice the small suitcase I wheeled past her. I allowed myself a faint smile. Let her think nothing had changed. The real show hadn't started yet. The drive downtown felt different that morning. Usually, I'd sit in traffic simmering in quiet frustration, but today I felt light, almost amused. My downtown condo waited for me like a secret I had kept too well, a backup plan I never thought I'd use. When I pulled into the underground garage and stepped into the private elevator, it felt like entering another life. The doors opened to a sleek, modern space. Glass walls, dark wood floors, a view of the city skyline that belonged to me alone. I set the suitcase down, walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and whispered to myself, "Welcome home." By noon, the phone calls began. The first was Carla. "Hey," she said casually, "my card just declined at the grocery store. Can you check with the bank?" I smiled, sipping my espresso. "Strange. Maybe call them yourself." "Well, I did, and they said the account's frozen." "Do you know anything about that?" "I do," I said smoothly. "I had it frozen." Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. "What? Why the hell would you?" "Because," I interrupted, my tone cocky, but even I realized I've been financing a circus. "And newsflash, Carla, I'm done being the clown." Her voice rose, shrill now. "Are you out of your mind? Jade needs tuition. I need to pay the bills." I chuckled. "Correction. You need me to pay the bills. Jade's not my daughter, remember? You made that clear. And as for you, well, you made your bed. Hope it's comfortable." Before she could explode further, I ended the call and set the phone down with deliberate calm. Not long after, my lawyer emailed confirmation. All accounts frozen. All cards disabled. Access denied. I poured myself a drink, even though it was barely afternoon, and sat back, savoring the moment. The city buzzed below, alive with noise, but up here, I was untouchable. By evening, the calls turned desperate. Carla again, this time with panic lacing every word. "Listen, this isn't funny. The rent, the utilities, they're all set up with your accounts. What am I supposed to do?" I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "Figure out. You can't just cut us off like this." "Can I?" I smirked, though she couldn't see it. "See, Carla, you wanted independence. You wanted to remind me at every turn that Jade has a father. That I'm just, what was it? A sponsor? An old man trying too hard." "That was a joke," she stammered, her voice cracking. "No, Carla," I said softly, almost like a whisper. "That was the truth. And you laughed. Now it's my turn. The silence on the line stretched, broken only by her ragged breathing. Then, the pleading began. Please don't do this. We'll work it out. I didn't mean, but I hung up again, leaving her voice to echo in the empty line. That night, I stood on the balcony of my condo, the city lights glittering beneath me like 1,000 tiny victories. For years, I had given everything, money, time, patience, all in hopes of earning love that was never mine to begin with. But tonight, I wasn't empty. I was free. And somewhere across town, in that house that was never truly mine, Carla was finally realizing what it meant to lose the lifeline she had mistaken for loyalty. The man she mocked, the ATM she and her family ridiculed, the fool they thought they could use forever, was gone. Her empire of entitlement had collapsed overnight. And her panic? That was music. Chapter 7. Carla's Denial. The condo smelled of coffee and leather when a knock came, loud, impatient, and repetitive. Carla never had patience for anything, especially when she wasn't in control. I took my time walking to the door. I even sipped my espresso before turning the handle, savoring the anticipation. When I finally opened it, she was there, arms folded across her chest, lips pressed tight in a smirk that tried too hard to be confident. "So this is where you've been hiding," she said, stepping past me as if she owned the place. Her eyes swept across the open-plan living room, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the polished marble counters. Of course, a secret bachelor pad. Figures. I closed the door behind her with deliberate slowness. "Nice of you to finally notice, Carla. 13 years, and you never once asked where I disappeared when I needed air." She turned on me, eyebrows raised, voice dripping sarcasm. "So this is it, huh? You're really divorcing me over a joke." I laughed, not loudly, but low and sharp. I let it linger in the room before I answered. "A joke." I took a step closer, and she flinched without meaning to. "No, Carla. I'm divorcing you because I stopped existing in that house a long time ago." You just buried the body with laughter. For the first time in years, she didn't have a comeback. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around again, as though the glass walls would offer her words. Her silence didn't last long. Carla always filled the air when she was nervous. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You're dramatic. You always have been." She gave a little laugh, but it cracked halfway through. "It was Jade's birthday. Families joke. People laugh. And you sulked like some martyr." I tilted my head. "Martyrs die for something, Carla. I was dying for nothing." Her smirk faltered. She walked to the counter, picking up one of the whiskey tumblers I'd left out from the night before, as though holding it gave her control again. "You think you're making a point. But really, you're just hurting Jade. She sees you as a father figure." I cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't insult me. Jade made it clear I was a wallet with legs. And you laughed." She slammed the glass down, her voice rising. "So what? You're going to ruin everything because you didn't like one comment?" I leaned against the counter opposite her, calm, composed, the smile never leaving my lips. "No, Carla. I'm going to end this because everything was already ruined. You just expected me to keep paying for the pieces." She stayed for another hour, circling the room, trying everything: anger, tears, seduction, nostalgia. I let her talk. I responded with short, precise sentences, never raising my voice, never breaking composure. Finally, she stormed out, muttering, "You'll regret this. You're not as untouchable as you think." I closed the door behind her and laughed quietly to myself. By afternoon, the fallout began. Jade posted on social media first. I didn't follow her, but word travels quickly in families that feed on gossip. A client of mine forwarded the screenshot to me, the caption plastered over a pouty selfie. Some people just pretend to be family until they show their true colors. Imagine leaving your wife and kid over one joke. Cold, heartless, ATM without a soul. The comments section bloomed with sympathy. Her friends chimed in, calling me a monster, a fraud, an old man who didn't understand real family. Even some of Carla's relatives added fuel, all too eager to paint me as the villain. I read every word, sipping my drink, a smile tugging at my lips. Villain? Perfect. Villains don't get used. Villains don't get laughed at. The phone calls came next. Carla's sisters were always loud, but that evening, they were volcanic. The first one didn't even bother with greetings. "You selfish bastard. How dare you humiliate my sister like this? Freezing her accounts? Kicking her out financially? What kind of man are you?" "The kind who's done," I said simply, and hung up. Seconds later, another call. Different sister. Louder this time. "You ruined her life. After everything she gave up for you." I actually chuckled into the phone. "Everything she gave up? That's rich. Tell me, what exactly did she sacrifice, aside from my bank account?" There was a string of curses before I pressed end call. The third sister tried a different tactic, fake sympathy laced with poison. "She's just emotional. You know, Carla, don't throw away your marriage over pride. Think of Jade. Think of the family." I swirled the ice in my glass, savoring the clink. I thought of Jade. I thought of family. Every single day. And all I got was a front row seat to my own erasure. "Thanks for the reminder." Then I hung up before she could reply. By the fifth call, I stopped answering. I turned the phone face down, set it on the counter, and let it buzz until it died. The silence after was bliss. I didn't rant. I didn't cry. I didn't pace the floor like a man unsure of himself. No, those days were long gone. I felt detached, cold, dangerous even, because nothing rattles people more than calmness in the face of chaos. I poured another drink, stood at the window, and watched the sun slip below the skyline. My reflection in the glass wasn't the man who once begged for affection, who once swallowed humiliation for the sake of belonging. No, the man staring back at me was someone else entirely. Smug, certain, untouchable, and as the city lit up beneath me, I whispered the words only I could hear. Checkmate. Chapter 8. The Fallout. The calls had slowed, but the silence that followed wasn't peace, it was strategy. I knew Carla too well. Silence meant she was recalculating, testing angles, preparing her next move. It came 3 days later. She showed up at the condo again, dressed carefully this time. A neat cream blouse, subtle perfume, hair smoothed down like she was meeting a client, not a husband she had humiliated. She even carried a bottle of wine, the same one I'd introduced her to years ago. "Truce?" she asked at the doorway, lips stretched in that faux sincere smile. I let her in, mostly because I was curious how low she would go. She set the bottle on the counter and pulled out the chair opposite mine at the dining table. "We've both said things," she began, folding her hands as if we were in a boardroom. "And, okay, maybe the birthday wasn't handled well, but you can't throw away 13 years over one mistake." One mistake. I arched a brow, swirling the coffee in my mug. "Carla, you build an empire of mistakes. I just stopped paying the taxes on it." Her lips twitched. She tried again. "Look, we've been good together. You've given Jade opportunities she never would have had. We've had vacations, a home, stability. That doesn't just disappear. We can work this out. Couples do all the time." I leaned back, studying her. "That's the thing. We weren't a couple, Carla. I was a sponsor. You were the beneficiary. The sooner you admit that, the sooner we can move on." Her nails tapped against the table, rhythm quickening with her heartbeat. "You're exaggerating. You're hurt. But you'll regret this when things calm down." I smirked. "No, Carla. You'll regret it. That's the difference." The silence that followed was delicious. 2 days later, it wasn't Carla who came knocking. It was Jade. She didn't waste time on greetings. She barged in, phone in hand, face full of entitlement she hadn't earned. "I need money for my tuition," she said flatly, like I was a vending machine she'd fed a coin into. I set down the architectural sketches I'd been reviewing and looked at her calmly. "Then you should talk to your father." Her face twisted. "You're supposed to help. You've always helped. This is about my education, not whatever drama you and Mom are having." I stood, walking toward the window, hands in my pockets. "No, Jade. This is exactly about the drama your mother created. You've been very clear, I'm not your dad. Remember? You'll never replace him. Your words. So now, he gets the honor of stepping up." Her voice rose, sharp and indignant. "He doesn't have that kind of money. You know that. Why are you being so cruel?" I turned slowly, meeting her glare with a calm smile. "Cruel would be me continuing to let you believe life has no consequences. Cruel would be financing your contempt. I'm not cruel, Jade. I'm just. Finished. She stomped her foot like a child denied a toy. You're pathetic. You're ruining my future. No, I corrected softly, walking closer until my voice was low and inescapable. Your future was never mine to build. I've spent years drawing blueprints on land that didn't belong to me. That construction ends today. Her jaw dropped, but before she could spit another insult, I gestured toward the door. You should go, and when you see your father, tell him it's his turn. He's been missing opening night for far too long. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame shuddered. I didn't flinch. The real storm came from Carla's family. Once the tuition money dried up, the texts and voicemails turned ugly. No more guilt trips cloaked in sympathy. Just venom. You're disgusting. Using a child to get back at her mother. You'll die alone. Don't expect anyone at your funeral. Everyone knows now you were nothing but an ATM, and not even a good one. I played the messages on speaker while making dinner, the insults bouncing off the marble walls. Each one felt like a weak punch thrown underwater, lots of effort, no impact. The truth was sinking in for them. The faucet was off, and no amount of screaming would turn it back on. Carla tried once more, this time over the phone, her voice sugar-coated but trembling beneath. Look, can we just work something out? Maybe not the marriage, fine, but Jade's tuition, her living expenses. You don't want her to struggle, do you? That's not who you are. I let the silence stretch until she finally whispered, please. Then I spoke, my voice even measured. Carla, I was who you wanted me to be for 13 years. Provider, punching bag, ghost. But I'm done. Let her father do what fathers are supposed to do. She exhaled shakily, then snapped. He can't, and you know it. That's not my problem, I said, and ended the call. The fallout wasn't loud on my end. Not anymore. Their rage, their threats, their insults, it was all noise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every withdrawal of my money, every refusal of my time, every calm no landed sharper than any argument I could have made. And as I sat on the balcony of my condo that night, glass in hand, the city lights sprawling below like stars I'd drawn myself, I felt something I hadn't in years. Satisfaction. Cold, quiet, complete. I didn't raise my voice. I whispered to the night. I didn't have to. Chapter 9. Rebuilding on his own terms. Months passed, and the world kept spinning as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. Everything had changed. The house on the hill, the laughter that once echoed through its rooms, the endless financial gymnastics, all of it was gone, replaced with quiet streets, morning sunlight streaming through my downtown condo, and the first real taste of freedom I had ever known. At first, the silence was uncomfortable. I had been a man whose identity had been tied to obligations, to expectations, to a facade of love that never truly existed. But the silence soon became a mirror. I saw myself clearly for the first time in years, imperfections, desires, vulnerabilities, all of it unmasked. I started therapy cautiously, skeptical at first. The idea of sitting across from a stranger and unpacking 13 years of betrayal, humiliation, and financial manipulation seemed almost indulgent. But I found solace in admitting things aloud that I had swallowed for too long. You ignored the red flags because you craved love, the therapist said during one session, pen poised above a notebook. I tilted my head, the irony hitting me with a bitter twist. So my entire adult life was a construction project built on my own neediness? She smiled gently. Not the entire life, but enough that you allowed people to define your worth. Her words stung, but they also freed me. I spent weeks revisiting the memories, the moments I justified. Carla laughing at my suggestions, Jade rolling her eyes at my patience, the family calling me an ATM while I smiled politely. I had accepted the facade of family because I wanted to believe love could be earned with cash and time. And now, I was learning the opposite. Love couldn't be bought. It had to be given and received in equal measure. One rainy afternoon, months after the dust of divorce had settled, I found myself in a quiet cafe. I rarely sought companionship, but friends had insisted I mingle, that the world didn't end just because one chapter had closed. I sat reading architectural journals, savoring a latte, when she walked in. Her presence was understated but commanding. She carried herself with a confidence that didn't demand attention. It earned it. Our eyes met briefly, and she smiled, the kind of smile that acknowledged you without dissecting you. I didn't approach her immediately. Instead, I observed the architect in me assessing angles, balance, and form. There was symmetry in her laughter, a rhythm in her movements, a warmth that didn't feel threatening but inviting. After a moment, our conversation began naturally. "I haven't seen you here before," she said, tilting her head. "Neither have I," I replied with a grin. "But sometimes the right place finds you." And just like that, a cautious friendship formed. We met for coffee, then lunch, then walks in the park. I was careful, no sudden declarations, no illusions that love could be rushed. But gradually, walls that had stood for years began to crumble. She listened. She asked questions. She valued the man I was, not the money I once supplied, not the identity I'd been forced to wear. A year later, we were married in a quiet ceremony. Not lavish, not performative, just intimate, the kind of wedding that felt like a promise rather than a spectacle. I didn't need approval from anyone, didn't need to impress a room full of people. I only needed her to see me clearly, and she did. And then, a year after that, our son was born. I held him in my arms, tiny and fragile, and for the first time in my life, love wasn't conditional. It wasn't transactional. It didn't depend on acceptance or approval or performance. It simply existed. I watched him sleep in the soft glow of the nursery lamp and felt something swell in my chest that I hadn't experienced before. Pure, untainted, unconditional love. I found myself reflecting often on the contrast between past and present. The irony was almost comic if it weren't so deeply satisfying. I had spent years bending to the will of people who never respected me, giving my heart and resources to a family that mocked me in private, while flaunting false gratitude in public. And now, the world was quieter. I was surrounded by people who valued me, not the money I could give, not the sacrifices I could make, not the patience I could extend. I poured a glass of whiskey one evening, watching the city lights flicker through the windows. My wife sat across the room, smiling at some private thought she hadn't shared yet. Our son played at our feet, oblivious to the complexities of adulthood, radiant in his innocence. I smiled a slow, cocky grin. Funny, I murmured to myself, how I had to lose a fake family to gain a real one. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. No compromises, no begging for love, no hiding behind patience or wealth. Only the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had reclaimed my life on my own terms. Some nights, when the world was quiet and the city hummed beneath our balcony, I thought back to Carla and Jade. Their laughter, their mockery, their demands. And I didn't feel anger anymore. Not really. I didn't feel resentment. I felt the satisfaction of a man who had outmaneuvered the expectations and broken free. The therapy sessions had taught me that closure doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from a life you build after the chaos, from the boundaries you enforce, and from the love you finally allow yourself to accept. I poured another glass of whiskey, watching the amber liquid swirl. My wife laughed at something our son had done, a high-pitched little shriek of joy. And I thought, with a mix of pride and quiet amusement, that I had finally earned this happiness, not through effort to impress, not through sacrifice without reciprocity, but by finally choosing myself. The irony was delicious. I had been a fool who paid for acceptance, who ignored red flags, who pretended patience would be enough. But the fool was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his worth, who demanded respect, and who finally received love that was real. As I looked down at my son, tiny fingers clutching at the blanket, I realized that everything I had endured, the humiliation, the mockery, the endless negotiations and betrayals, had led me here. Every late-night silence, every laugh at my expense, every dollar spent in vain had been preparation for a life I actually wanted to live. And the best part? I had built it myself. I didn't have to justify it to anyone. I didn't have to compete for love or approval. I didn't have to chase validation in the eyes of people who never respected me. Only the quiet, cocky knowledge that I had finally done it right. I leaned back in the chair, swirling the whiskey, and let the cityscape stretch before me, a testament to the life I had reclaimed. Funny how life works, I thought. Pain, betrayal, loss, they were all temporary. But the lessons endured. And in the end, the reward wasn't revenge or retribution. It was something far rarer, far more satisfying. I smiled again, this time at nothing in particular. Funny how I had to lose a fake family to gain a real one. Chapter 10. The postcard that didn't matter. The mailbox clanged shut, jolting me from the quiet Sunday morning in my downtown condo. I walked over, expecting the usual, a stack of bills, the weekly flyers, but instead there it was. A thin, crisp envelope with an unfamiliar postmark. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Carla. I smirked and carried it into the kitchen, placing it on the counter without opening it. My wife, perched on a stool with our son clinging to her leg, glanced up. "Another bill?" she asked, not looking worried. "Something like that," I said, letting the smirk linger. Curiosity tugged at me, though I knew exactly what this was. I slit the envelope with a precise flick of the blade of my pocket knife and pulled out the postcard. It was one of those touristy cards, a cliché snapshot of some tropical beach. The message inside, brief and carefully neutral. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well. See." I set it down again and chuckled softly, shaking my head. Carla's attempt at connection, or perhaps a guilt-laced token, was about as sharp as a wet noodle. The years had taught me one thing. Words alone couldn't reach me anymore. My son, oblivious to the weight of adult correspondence, toddled across the kitchen floor, tripping over his own feet. I caught him effortlessly and lifted him into my arms. His small face beamed up at me, eyes bright, innocent, unburdened. "Daddy," he squealed, wrapping his tiny fingers around mine. I laughed, the sound rich and free, unlike the hollow echoes of the past. "Hey, buddy, did you miss me while I was fighting off the mailbox monsters?" He giggled uncontrollably, and my wife smiled at the scene, sipping her coffee. This life, this love, this laughter was more real than any illusion I had chased in the past. I remembered Carla and Jade, their faces, the sneers, the laughter at my expense, the endless negotiations, the entitlement, the social media drama, the constant reminders that I wasn't enough. And for a moment, the memory flickered in my mind, sharp as a blade, but only for a moment. Because the truth was, I didn't hate them. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel betrayal gnawing at my chest. All of that had been processed, absorbed, and transformed into something far more potent. Indifference. The postcard meant nothing. Jade's absence in my life meant nothing. The years of mockery and humiliation had been priced, paid, and cashed in full. And now, the account was closed. Permanently. I looked down at my son again, his little hands gripping mine, a curious frown forming as he tried to figure out a way to climb onto my shoulders. "You want to fly, huh?" I asked. He nodded vigorously. I hoisted him up effortlessly, spinning him gently until he shrieked with delight, arms outstretched. From the balcony, the city stretched beneath us, alive and sprawling, filled with thousands of lives intersecting in endless chaos. I realized I hadn't felt this calm, this untouchable in decades. The morning light caught the postcard again, lying innocuously on the counter. I picked it up one more time and studied it. The neat, scripted C. At the bottom, the signature I had once thought meant everything was now laughably small. Petty. Insignificant. I thought about the years I had poured into a house that was never mine, into a marriage that was a transaction, into a family that never truly needed me. And I smiled, not with bitterness, but with relief. The relief of knowing I had escaped. The relief of knowing I had rebuilt. The relief of knowing the only family I needed to invest in now was mine, the one I had chosen, not the one I had inherited. Later that afternoon, we went for a walk. My wife held my son's hand while I trailed slightly behind, watching their small silhouettes against the sidewalk. People passed by, unaware of the quiet victories hidden in the mundane. But I noticed. Every step we took together felt like reclamation, like proof that I had finally turned the page on a chapter that had long since ended. We stopped at a small park, and I watched my son climb the jungle gym, his laughter ringing out pure and bright. I found a bench, sat down, and let my gaze wander. No calls from Carla. No social media tantrums from Jade. No relatives demanding justification or access. Just silence. And in that silence, peace. That evening, back in the condo, I found myself reflecting on the years that had brought me here. The sacrifices I had made, the patience I had shown, the humiliation I had endured, all of it had been necessary. Not as punishment, but as education. Each insult, each dismissive remark, each laugh at my expense had been a blueprint for something I was building now. A life I controlled, a family I nurtured, a self-worth that wasn't contingent on anyone's approval. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and held it up to the light, watching the amber glow ripple. My son crawled onto my lap, tired now, and rested his head against my chest. I felt the steady beat of his heart, and it was grounding, reassuring, real. My wife joined us on the couch, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. I rested my chin on her head and closed my eyes for a moment, allowing myself the full weight of contentment. And then, almost on instinct, I thought back to the postcard one last time. Carla's attempt at reaching out. Jade's absence in my life. The family that once mocked, judged, and demanded. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel longing. I felt freedom. I had walked away from their chaos, from their mockery, from their entitlement. And in doing so, I had built something far more valuable. A life worth living, on my own terms, surrounded by love that was genuine and unwavering. I glanced at my son, now asleep in my arms, chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. He stirred slightly, opening one eye to meet mine. I smiled and whispered, "You're exactly where you belong, kiddo. Safe, loved, real." My wife kissed the top of his head and rested her cheek against mine. We didn't need words. We didn't need acknowledgement. The simplicity of the moment carried more meaning than years of conflict ever had. I thought again of the past, the ridicule, the demands, the endless juggling of expectations that were never mine to meet, and I realized that it had all led here. Each painful experience had paved the way for this calm, unshakable happiness. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Not to Carla, not to Jade, not to the family that had once jeered at me. I only needed to honor the life I had built, the family I had chosen, and the love that surrounded me. I placed the postcard back in a drawer, neatly, deliberately, as though burying it for good. It would never haunt me. Its meaning was null, its power gone. I turned back to my son, his soft breathing steady, and allowed a quiet chuckle to escape. The city lights outside glimmered through the windows, and I felt the kind of serenity that comes only after storms have passed. For years, I had fought to be seen, to be valued, to matter. And now, I mattered, not because anyone had validated me, but because I had finally reclaimed my own life. I rested my hand on my son's head and whispered, almost to myself, walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning. They thought I'd break. Instead, I built. That's the difference between them and me.